On Chris Deals With It, I talk about the frameworks and methods I use to clear personal, creative, and professional roadblocks. My goal is to help others bridge the gaps between where they're at now and what they want to achieve. If you're new to the show, I'm an engineer, writer, parent, game designer, leader, and reader who leverages that experience to develop creative solutions to problems. An AI statement that all elements of this episode are products of the author, Chris Kreuter, and made without the use of any AI tools. Welcome to episode 62 of Chris Deals With It, Consider Railroading. My guest today is Andrew Stahl, who founded his executive recruiting firm in 2014. This year, his firm celebrates 10 years of service to the global rail industry. I'm proud to have been counted among their many clients, having their help to land a previous but wonderful position at a firm that fit my skills, personality, and career aspirations at the time. Andrew and I have a two-part conversation. On episode 61, we started with an introduction to the world of recruiters. Today, we're exploring the amazing industry of railroading and public transit, where we both enjoyed rewarding careers. We're going to cover the wide range of disciplines and needs at Class 1 and short-line freight railroads, transit authorities, equipment manufacturers, and support firms. Our industry is in dire need of talent, so we're providing practical information for anyone considering a pivot to a new industry, as well as those who might just be entering the workforce. For more information about Andrew Stahl and his recruiting firm, check out their website at stahlrecruiting.com. That's STAHL recruiting.com. And also check out the free episode notes at chriskreuter.com. That's CHRISKREUTER.com. All right, let's get into our interview with Andrew Stahl. We want to talk about the railroad industry specifically. Sure. I think last time I checked, the number of companies that are looking for good people industry is all of them.
Pretty much.
Especially, nowadays I'm more on the public transit side, more so than the freight railroad. I know you really focusing on the railroading portion of it. There are other forms of transportation where there's tangential relationships that might be applicable, because you don't just deal with the Class 1 railroads. You work with vendors. You'll work with some public transit authorities, I believe.
We work on both sides. I look at it as like a Venn diagram. You always rail specific, as opposed to, say, buses, if you will.
Yeah.
But when you divide it between the freight side, the Class 1s, and the short lines, if you will, and you look at the transit arena, the Amtraks of the world, the BARTs, the WMATAs, and the Long Island Railroads, we work with both sides. And we work with a lot of suppliers that funnel componentry to both sides.
Yeah, which is a wide swath of industry to cover. I mean, the railroad industry, and you provided some statistics here. I mean, there's over 1.2 million jobs just in the U.S. alone. And there are Class 1s that operate in Canada and Mexico as well. So, we're not excluding them from the conversation. But you're talking about an industry that spends around $250 billion a year in infrastructure and equipment alone. So maybe you want to talk a bit about just the scope of the railroad industry and the types of jobs that are out there.
Sure. It's a huge industry. Going back to your statistics, I think it's 1.2 million labor force in the rail industry. And I think the $250 billion was over the last 10 years, if I remember correctly, from the AAR on infrastructure. But that's a lot of money. And I think they also attribute 18% of capital expenditures or revenues to capital expenditures from the railways versus general manufacturing, which I think is about 3%. But to address your point, it's a wonderful industry to be part of. And you think of the Class 1s, the Norfolk Southerns, Union Pacifics of the world, if you will. 85% of those folks that work for them are unionized. And unions generally pay good wages. Again, using the AAR numbers, I believe it's $143,000 is the average salary. And that's pretty nice salary for being out in the field, for sure. And the industry as a whole offers many opportunities. We're embedded deeply with the Texas Short Line Association, and I know from those guys and just the Short Line Association in general, there's like 603 short lines out there. So there's a multitude of railways and Class 1s that you could work for just in general, but there's suppliers and service suppliers and product suppliers that are to the industry. So you could think of roles of, like, just in the railways themselves, you can think of operations, sales and business development, finance, engineering, technology. And when you spread it out to the industry as a whole, it just spreads out from there. So basically, whatever your skill set is and your forward trajectory is, you can find a home in the rail industry, without a doubt.
Yeah, and railroad is just part of a larger supply chain too, right? You're talking intermodal, marine,
Exactly.
ports,
Trucking trends,
trucking,
exactly.
aviation. Again, the supplier base covers the pretty much the entire gamut of manufacturing, and a lot of those manufacturers and suppliers are, their materials are handled by the railroad, so they actually have them all as customers too, right? I think that there's just such a, I think it's something like 90% of the freight that goes through the U.S. has touched a train at some point in its journey.
I
Um,
believe that metric's pretty
so
close.
railroading, so yeah, it's, and I'll pull some more statistics for that for the show notes. But railroading is such a critical part of not just our infrastructure, but it touches on so much of the economy that you may think you're in a career. And part of our intention here is to get people excited about the railroad industry, to
Right.
consider the industry. Right, it's our way of giving back to it, because we need people from a wide range of disciplines right now, especially on the tech
Yes.
side. But you may be working in industry you don't think is related to rail, that might be. It might be a weird path to get there, which is, why talking to recruiters, can be a great way to discover that, hey, wow, I actually have a really valuable skill
Well, if
set.
you look at, say, the class ones or any of the railroads themselves, people always think of moving trains and train movements, which of course comes first to mind. But if we just took a particular window and looked at the maintenance away, which is that arena, which is the track work and the ballast and the bridges and the tunnels, there's there's engineering
Sensors, yeah.
companies that simply just work in that arena towards designing the bridges and the tunnels. There's companies that just build the track. There's manufacturers like Placer American that makes the equipment that goes over the tracks that keeps it there. There's the technology that's embedded within all those firms and scanning the tracks, looking for errors and looking for problems that need to be fixed and maintenance. So just even within that one niche of the rail industry, there's a whole bevy of opportunities.
Yeah, it's a common phrase, right? There's riches and niches, and railroads got tons of niches.
Very true.
So
Very true.
yeah, we talked a bit about, we've thrown some terms around different types of railroads, but let's stick with freight railroading for now, just to simplify the discussion here. But how would you classify the distinctions between a class one and a short line railroad, especially in terms of the hiring processes or the types of jobs that are available?
Wow. Well, I guess from high level working down, the class ones themselves are very large and sprawling. They're the General Motors of the world, if you will. Um, they offer.
Yeah, these are your BNSFs, your Canadian Northerns. I mean, I'll provide a list in the
Sure,
show notes
sure.
for
Yeah,
everybody.
BNSF, Canadian National, Canadian Pacific, or KCCP now, or CPKC, I guess I should
Yeah.
say. But yes, the class ones, they offer a lot of advantages. One, a lot of advancement opportunity and breadth of terrain and opportunities career wise. They generally pay very well and they train very, very well. If I was to cast a negative, sometimes they can get a little bit out of you in blood, sweat, and tears, if you will, because they can be very demanding. They're 24/7. They never shut off. I say the only thing I can think of being from Texas in the South that they shut down for hurricanes, when they pull the locomotives and the cars off the tracks. But aside from that, they roll on 24/7. And when you segue to the short lines, they're the handoff between the shippers, the lumber yards, or the plastic pellets, or oil and gas company, and the class one itself. So they're the last mile, if you will. And in working for those guys, glibly again, the pay generally isn't as much as the class one, but by the same token, you get to wear many different hats, and the atmosphere is generally a little bit more relaxed. Short lines can be large and sprawling, or they can be really teeny tiny. So it really depends on the atmospherics of them. But it isn't uncommon to have a Monday through Friday kind of routine on a short line, in contrast to a Canadian National that's 24/7, 365 nonstop. So it's a different personality, if you will, both good and both negative in different arenas.
No, exactly. And again, there'll be lots of resources for people in the show notes about where you can find out about these different agencies. There's industry groups for each of them as well, like the Short Line Association and things
Mm-hmm.
like that. So I'll have those
Yep,
links.
exactly.
Again, you've mentioned working with transits, and a little known fact is Amtrak's actually a class one railroad, but also does handle people. And maybe talk about dealing with the
Right.
transit authorities, which again tend to be public agencies or governmental agencies, which do have a very different process than a class one for-profit railroad that's bringing in billions of dollars a day.
Yeah, they have different outlooks. I guess being very high level, I would say the class ones are real profit maximizers, right? That is their name of the game. And I feel that the transit arena is a different perspective. It tends to be a little bit more political, if you will. And in their defense, they have a lot of different competing agendas as what they're trying to accomplish with their operations in moving people not only efficiently and safely and trying to do it as much of a profit as possible, but they have other attributes that they're trying to accomplish that may not be profit maximizing, if you will.
Yeah, and one of the other elements of the industry that we've talked about manufacturers and service providers, and I think one of their critical roles is really the interstitial pieces between these different agencies, right? Your short lines, the class ones. You talk about even transit authorities like Amtrak. So people may have heard the news about PTC, or Positive Train Control, which is a large, or took over a decade of implementation, where you're bringing telecommunications equipment onto
Mm-hmm.
the trains because they have to operate on the same track, so we can avoid massive collisions or incidents, which to this day still happen. But it makes it possible for someone in a back office to stop a train that might be careening into a passenger area. But there's lots of little places like that
Mm-hmm.
where manufacturers and suppliers and service providers really operate to make sure that things between these different agencies work smoothly. So do you want to talk a bit more about the manufacturer's perspective for railroad recruiting?
There's a whole, I guess maybe if you think of, like, I'll go back to the automotive analysis, and you think of like a General Motors, right? And you got a production line, trucks are running down the line. Well, General Motors doesn't make all the glass, and they don't make the tires, and they may not make the gaskets for the engine. And so if you look at it as kind of visual, you've got the truck being bolted together as it goes down the line, but you've got all these ancillary industries sending their products to get bolted onto the truck, if you will. The Goodyear tires, if you will, or the glass company and the rubber companies and the companies that make steering wheels or seats. So all that stuff comes together. And I would say the same way you can kind of use that same visual with a railroad. Yes, they own the track and the locomotives, but they generally don't own all the rail cars. Those are usually owned by lessors or shippers. And there's a whole industry that not only provides rail cars or the leasing of rail cars, but track work, ballast, ties, components for locomotives and engines, components for rail cars. There's a whole system that feeds into the railroad that you and I see going down the track that's largely invisible. There's companies that just make parts of brakes and trucks for the rail cars. That it's very specific, I guess is what I'd say. So there's a lot of suppliers baked into that rail car and locomotive as you watch it go down the track that is largely unseen.
And it's not just mechanical or physical components. It's also your software is a huge
Correct.
deal. Anybody listening to this that's in any type of data
Yes.
analytics job,
Oh my
anyone with
gosh,
a lot of
yes.
computer science background is insanely valuable right now because not I think one of our industry's weaker points is we do tend to see a lot of antiquated computer systems. Maybe not the higher end larger corporations, but public agencies do tend to have some older software or are looking to upgrade some of their analytics platforms because that's becoming more of a trend. You're seeing it now with AI. But there's also these support
Mm-hmm,
things like
mm-hmm,
insurance providers, distributors. You mentioned leasing agencies. So there's non-physical
mm-hmm.
component suppliers as well in this supply chain.
Well, you bring up an excellent point, and I didn't hit on earlier, is technology. And you're right, generally, again, broad brush, the industry is known for being very old school and resistant to change. I mean, that's 100%. You can love that or dislike it, but it kind of is what it is. But that said, I would say um, it's being forced on the industry, and they're starting to really open up their arms to it because they're starting to see the benefit of it. You think of the technology as just tracking assets, locomotives and rail cars. You think of condition maintenance issues on locomotives or hot bearings, wheels, and whatnot to know that they might fail. The sensor sends that information back to the home office, so to speak, so they know to pull the rail car off so they can get it fixed. Passenger information systems, fuel management, communications, dispatching. There's so many avenues for technology and engineering to improve the efficiencies and the visuals of how these complex systems operate. Because there's something like 1.6 million rail cars, and I think at any given time there's about 1.3
Yeah.
floating around North America. So there's a lot of things to keep track of, and there's a lot of things that can go wrong, right? And shippers want to know where their cars are, and that's one of the other pushes now in the rail industry. People use
Yeah.
Amazon. You can track your package, where it is, almost literally where it is. And for a long time, shippers would lose. Where'd my coal car go? Somewhere in Pennsylvania somewhere, right? Well, now the technology is getting more in place to where they can tell you exactly where it is and when it's going to be to you. And that just helps the synergies, not only from the railroads, but you think of demurrage charges on the shipper side. It just, the rail
Yeah.
car velocities, it just makes the whole system as a whole more fluid, more streamlined, more efficient, and really less costly for everybody.
Yeah, there's a lot of systems thinking that goes into this industry across, again, all aspects of the industry as well. And I think it's one of
Mm-hmm.
those things where one of the things I love about most is even though you can be in that theoretical mindset, you get such fast reaction time. Like you see a direct result a lot faster in our industry. Right? If you try to change something different within your organization, you're going to see a direct impact on the bottom line. If you're working for a profit agency or for a transit authority, you might all of a sudden see a peak in ridership. So you're getting a lot better feedback and a lot faster in this industry.
And everybody's connected now. I mean, their phones. The phones have changed so much, and you can track so much on your phones. I mean, you can see when your plane flight's in or if it's delayed, and you can do the same thing on passenger systems. So yeah, the technology is just embedded in our culture more so than ever, and in the rail industry as a whole as well.
I want to talk to just briefly about some of the skill differentiators and certifications that can really make an impact on our industry. I'm thinking of things that are very much in demand right now. I mentioned data science and literacy. You want to touch on a few more that you
Mhm.
think of?
Well, I always think it's advantageous to invest in yourself. Even if it's not a specific certification or degree, just reading a book, so to speak. Always keeping up on the industry and what's happening. Self learning, I mean, just growing is always important. Um, I think maybe, again, kind of going down a little bit further, I would think obviously college or some people, when you want managerial level roles, MBAs and such, so you understand finance and marketing, you have a touch on those things. I think so too in the technical realm with engineering and technology. A lot of those certifications can be important. And it's a nice signal too when you go back to the resume as you advance through your career. If you've got little things there where you've taken extra classes or training or sales training for sales and business development folks, there's always a way to improve yourself. And so I think taking extra courses, whether it's directly related, I want to advance my career, or it's just kind of tangential, I think that increases your, how I would say self worth. That's the wrong way of saying it, but gives you more breadth, gives you more knowledge, and knowledge
No,
is
exactly.
power.
And listen, the author in me has to stop here and ask you a question. I'm putting you on the spot here, and take your time and think about it. And
Okay, okay.
I'll cut out the little pauses here. So, give me your
Pop
Mount
quiz.
Rushmore of books that you feel would help somebody, either whether it be industry specific, recruiting specific. Any recommendations you give for the audience?
Oh my
You can take your time with this one. It's okay.
God. Oh gosh, I'm gonna have to maybe punt on this to think about things.
Or do you have some
Oh
favorite
wow.
books? One or two that that really inspired you or something like that. And I can cut out the preamble.
Most of my books that I really find endearing are authors like F. Scott Fitzgerald, Saint Exupéry, a French writer. But they're more novels and they're not really related directly to the rail industry or business. I
Oh,
have
wow.
to punt on this, Chris, and think about a couple of good books to come back with you on. Um, there's one on the sales side of things. Bettinger came out with a book that I love. It. I wish I could. Oh, I'm trying to think of how I turned myself from a failure into a success, I think is how it's titled. It came out like
Huh.
1923 or something. It's very old school when you read it, right? But it's on point and it's relatively brief and it's succinct and it's just a lovely, lovely book.
Is there anything that you kind of wanted to touch on that we haven't had a chance to that I can either cut in or?
I guess the main thing you point towards is COVID and post COVID. The landscape has changed a bit, not only from COVID forcibly shutting down the economy for a spell and everybody sort of self isolating, which kind of mapped into working remotely, which has kind of morphed into a different thing. And it's interesting. It with the technology allowing us to work remotely, it opened up a lot of doors and freedom to folks. And some folks, if some individuals with careers as such as, coding or writing, they can operate remotely quite efficiently. But there's also kind of the pushback that you lose a bit when you're not in an office environment. And there's younger individuals that have had their whole career now at this point that have never been in an office environment. And there's a whole social etiquette, a way of doing things, and a learning curve to operating in an environment with people as opposed to kind of what I do, so to speak, sitting at home
Yeah.
with your pink fuzzy slippers on, right? And it's interesting because there's an article actually in the Wall Street Journal today from Louis Gerstner. He's an ex CEO and chairman of IBM, and he was pointing out that, and he brought up some good points saying that, if you really want a leadership position, you can't really stay working remotely. He pointed out time management skills that he learned from his boss that you'd never learn. And also, there's sort of a team synergy to getting people to pull in the same direction. The other thing, too, I think of myself is that I think it's really valuable when you sit in office and you're young in your career and you're starting out, and you can sit and listen to your boss take a tough call from a customer in real time. That's something you'll never get from a Zoom call or trying to learn remotely. And while I like the technology and what it allows us to work remotely, I'm not hypocritically, I do this exactly right. I operate, my team operates remotely.
I hear you.
I can see the positives of it, but I think some people have gone to an all or nothing, and I think there's going to be a pull back towards the office because I think there's things you lose when you're not sitting in the office with folks. Glibly, you just walk down the hall and ask Susie a quick question, and you get your answer, and you come back, and you don't have to set up an email or a Zoom call or something. It's just faster. And I just think there's a lot of water cooler talk that's lost when people are kind of in isolation, if you will.
The smaller the company, the smaller the organization, the more important that is, because sometimes that culture that you can build, if you have to wear many hats, like we talked about. And the railroad industry is interesting in the fact that there are jobs, like you and I have talked about, where you could do it more remotely. There might be more competition for jobs, salary pressures associated with that, or maybe even hybrid work schedule. You get access to a bigger talent pool than in your because again, railroading does tend to be very geographically focused. Right. You can't connect rail cars together. You can't work. You can't make freight move through the yard and throw your switches from your kit. Well, I guess you could with some certain software, but for the most part, there's a lot of jobs in our industry that are mechanical in nature, where you have to be on site to do it. From a safety and ethical perspective. I think that's also a good thing in the future of AI and some of the automation that's going to be coming. I think there's certain jobs and roles that are going to fundamentally look different within the next 3 to 5 years. So it's a really good point that, not everything is going to be eligible for remote work. But, listen, railroading is a great way to see the country too. Some of these, especially the class ones, operate over a large geographical area where you can maybe, get transferred to different areas. I mean,
not to pick on UP or BNSF, but they operate all over the West. So, I mean, you can go everything from Seattle to El Paso, and it gives you a lot of opportunities with a class one. Not only they train you, but growth opportunities, travel to see the country. A wealth of opportunities.
I mean, I think I visited over 25 states just because of my role in the railroad industry. I should say states and provinces, but I'm actually going to check that. I'm gonna do a little postscript at the end. I'm actually curious now. It's like, that's a great point though, you've been to all the different shows, you've met people from all over the country, different walks of life. And that's, again, one of the great things of our industry. It is very diverse in terms of the people and experiences, and welcoming at the same time. So Andrew, thank you so much for joining the show, man. This has been awesome. Yeah. Any last parting thoughts or?
No, happy to help, happy to disseminate information on recruiting in the rail industry as in general. A very, very big advocate of that. And if anybody listening would like career help or is looking for a change, know that they can reach out to my agency in confidence and get good, solid information and not jeopardize anything in having that conversation.
What's your URL for your website? And then maybe where they can find you on LinkedIn or social media?
stahlrecruiting.com. STAHLRECRUITING.com. That'll get you to the website, but we're also on Instagram and X and a bunch of different social media platforms.
If you feel that Chris dealt with it, I'd appreciate your support of the show by sharing it with someone who might benefit. Ratings on your favorite podcast player are also helpful in growing the audience. Visit chriskreuter.com for free downloadable PDFs with notes and resources from today's episode, sign up for the CDWI mailing list, or to send in your problems or requests for future shows. That's CHRISKREUTER.com, or use the link in the show notes.